The road stretched endlessly under the dark sky, only a few streetlights flickering weakly. It was almost 3 a.m. The night was silent, too silent. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just the sound of tires rolling over the empty highway. Ravi was driving home after a long shift at work. His eyes were heavy, his body tired. He had been on the road for hours. Suddenly, his car started jerking. The fuel meter blinked red. He groaned, realizing he had forgotten to refuel. Up ahead, a dimly lit petrol pump appeared. A small board hung above it, swinging slightly. The words were faded, but he could still read them. Petrol available, 24 hours. Ravi sighed in relief and turned toward the pump. The place looked abandoned. No other vehicles, no staff visible. Just an old shop beside the pump, its shutters half closed. He stepped out of the car, shivering slightly. The air was colder than before. He looked around, searching for an attendant. "Hello," he called. No answer. He took out his phone to check the time. 2:57 a.m. Then a sound, a soft rustling noise, like someone or something was watching him. He turned sharply, his heartbeat quickening. Nothing, just shadows stretching long under the dim lights. A man suddenly appeared from behind the shop, an old, thin man with hollow eyes and a slow walk. His uniform was torn and stained with something dark. "You need fuel?" the man asked in a low voice. Yeah, full tank," Ravi said, forcing a smile. The man nodded and started filling the car. His movements were stiff, unnatural, like he wasn't used to doing this anymore. Then he whispered, "You should leave." Ravi frowned. "What?" "Leave. Now, before 3 a.m. Ravi laughed nervously. "Why?" The man's face didn't change. He just stared at Ravi with empty eyes. "You don't want to know." A chill ran down Ravi's spine. He swallowed hard, looking around the deserted pump. The silence felt heavier. Then his phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Get out of there. Now!" His breath hitched. He turned to ask the man something, but he was gone. Disappeared. Then bang. A loud noise from behind the shop. Ravi spun around. A shadow moved. A shape, tall and twisted, slipping through the darkness. He felt a cold sweat break on his forehead. His hand shook as he reached for the fuel nozzle, but then his car door slammed shut on its own. He jumped back, his pulse racing. The keys were still inside. The engine was off. Then the lights flickered. The petrol pump lights dimmed, then blinked out completely. Darkness. Then a scream, a blood-curdling, bone-chilling scream echoed through the air. It wasn't far. It was right there, near him. His hands fumbled for his phone. 2:59 a.m. 1 minute left. Then he saw it. A shadowy figure stood near the road, barely visible in the darkness. Tall, with unnaturally long arms, its head tilted sideways like it was studying him. Then it moved. It didn't walk. It didn't run. It just glided straight towards him. Ravi gasped and turned to his car, yanking at the handle. Locked. The figure was closer now. He could hear something, a whisper, a growl. Then, as the clock hit 3 a.m., everything went silent. The figure stopped. And then darkness consumed him. The next morning, the police found Ravi's car still parked at the petrol pump. The door was open, the keys in the ignition. But Ravi was gone. There was no sign of a struggle. No blood. No footprints. Nothing. Just like the others. Because he wasn't the first. And he wouldn't be the last. The morning sun rose slowly, casting an eerie glow over the abandoned petrol pump. The silence was thick, as if the air itself was holding its breath. A lone crow cawed from a distance, the only sign of life in an otherwise lifeless place. A police jeep pulled up near Ravi's car. Officer Arjun stepped out, adjusting his belt. His eyes scanned the area, his brows furrowing. The car door was wide open, key still in ignition. No signs of Ravi. He had seen this before. Too many times. Every time it was the same. A car left abandoned. The driver missing. No blood, no evidence, no struggle. Just gone. Arjun sighed and turned to his junior officer, Ramesh. Call his family. Find out when they last spoke to him. Ramesh nodded and pulled out his phone. Arjun walked toward the petrol pump, stepping over dried leaves and dirt. The place looked frozen in time. Old fuel dispensers, a faded signboard in a small, dusty office. The shutters were half closed, the windows covered in grime. Something about this place always made his skin crawl. He peered inside the office. Papers scattered across the desk. An old calendar stuck on a date from 5 years ago. He pushed the door open, and a musty smell hit him, like damp wood and something. Rotting, a newspaper lay on the floor, yellowed with age. The headline read, "Mysterious Disappearances at Highway Petrol Pump Continue." Arjun had seen this article before. It was written years ago when the disappearances first began. But the strangest part? The pattern had never changed. Every time, it happened around 3 a.m. He turned back and found Ramesh standing awkwardly near the car. His face was pale. "Sir, his family says he left work around midnight. His wife tried calling him, but he didn't answer. She thought he was just late." Arjun's jaw tightened. Same story. Every time. He looked at the car again. The fuel tank was full. So Ravi had managed to refuel before he vanished, which meant someone or something was here when it happened. The petrol pump owner. Arjun strode toward the small room beside the pump, the one where the old man stayed. The door was slightly open. "Hello," he called out. No answer. He pushed the door further and stepped inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from a small, flickering bulb. A strong smell of kerosene filled the air. And then he saw it. A single chair in the middle of the room, a rope tied around his arms. And on the wall, a message scrawled in black charcoal. "Don't stop here at night." His blood ran cold. The town of Rampur was small, the kind of place where everyone knew each other. And everyone knew about the petrol pump, but no one talked about it. Arjun sat in the local tea shop, sipping his chai, his mind heavy. The old men sitting nearby whispered among themselves, occasionally glancing at him. He knew what they were talking about. After a few minutes, one of the older men, Baba Sham, walked over and sat across from him. His hands were rough, his face lined with age. "You should stop looking," Baba Sham said quietly. Arjun stared at him. "You know something." Baba Sham sighed, shaking his head. "Everyone knows, but no one says anything. Because those who ask too many questions, they disappear too." Arjun leaned forward. "What happened at that petrol pump?" Baba Sham hesitated, glancing around as if making sure no one else was listening. Then, in a hushed voice, he said, "It started years ago, before your time. A man named Vikram used to run that pump. He was greedy, didn't care about people, only wanted money." Arjun nodded, waiting. One night, a traveler stopped for fuel. A woman, alone. Vikram saw that she had gold jewelry, expensive belongings. He killed her. Baba Sham's voice dropped even lower. Buried her body behind the pump. Arjun's fingers tightened around his cup and... The next night, someone else stopped for fuel, and they disappeared. Then another, and another. Arjun frowned. So Vikram kept killing people? Baba Sham shook his head. No, Vikram vanished too. One night, just like the others. He was there. And then he wasn't. A chill ran down Arjun's spine. No one knows what happened to him. Baba Sham continued. But after that night, people who stopped there after midnight, they never came back. Arjun felt his throat go dry. And no one did anything? No investigation. Some tried, Baba Sham said grimly. Reporters, curious travelers, even police officers. He looked Arjun in the eye, but they never returned. Silence hung between them. Outside, the wind howled to the narrow streets. Arjun exhaled slowly. So you're saying it's... Cursed? Baba Sham didn't answer. He simply got up, placing a hand on Arjun's shoulder. Don't go back there. Not at night. Not ever. Then he walked away, leaving Arjun alone with his thoughts. The petrol pump. Midnight. 3 a.m. Something was happening there, and Arjun was going to find out what. Arjun sat in his police jeep, staring at the abandoned petrol pump in the distance. The sun had almost disappeared, and darkness spread over the lonely highway like a thick blanket. Baba Sham's warning played in his head. Don't go back there. Not at night. Not ever. But Arjun wasn't the kind of man to ignore something like this. People were disappearing. There had to be an explanation. He picked up his radio. Ramesh, meet me at the station. We need to check the old records. Sir, are you sure? Ramesh's hesitant voice crackled through. I want to know everything about that place. Every report, every case. A long pause. Then, understood, sir. Arjun started the engine and turned toward the police station. Inside the records room, dust covered the shelves, and old case files were stacked in every corner. The yellowed papers smelled of time, of stories long forgotten. Arjun and Ramesh dug through the records. Sir, here. Ramesh pulled out an old file, the cover faded and torn. The title read, Petrol Pump Disappearances Unsolved. Arjun flipped it open. Pages after pages of missing person reports. 1998, a truck driver vanished. His truck found with the engine running. 2003, a college student on a road trip, last seen refueling at the pump. Never seen again. 2007, a family of 3. Their car abandoned. No trace of them. 2012, a journalist investigating the disappearances. Vanished without a clue. Arjun's fingers tightened around the paper. It was endless. Every few years, someone disappeared from the same spot. Then one report caught his eye. Vikram Singh, petrol pump owner. Missing since 1995, his pulse quickened. He turned to Ramesh. Did anyone ever find his body? Ramesh shook his head. No. Sir, he disappeared just like the others. Arjun stared at the file. Something wasn't right. Why was Vikram's disappearance recorded just like the victims? Something was drawing people to that place. And once they arrived, they never left. A shiver ran down his spine. He needed to go back. But this time he wouldn't go alone. The night was cold. The wind howled through the empty highway as Arjun and Ramesh drove toward the petrol pump. The closer they got, the heavier the air felt. It was as if something unseen was pressing down on them. Ramesh gripped the steering wheel tightly. Sir, are we really doing this? What if it's true? Arjun didn't answer immediately. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses. But the disappearances were real, and the only way to find the truth was to face it. We'll check the area, look for clues, Arjun said. No superstitions, just facts. But deep inside, a part of him wasn't so sure. At exactly 2:45 a.m., they arrived at the petrol pump. It looked the same, silent, abandoned, frozen in time. The flickering bulb in the small office was the only light. The darkness around them felt alive, shifting, watching. Arjun stepped out, his boots crunching on the dry ground. Ramesh hesitated before following. Stay alert, Arjun muttered. They moved carefully, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The petrol dispensers were rusted, their meters stuck on random numbers. The old office door creaked as Arjun pushed it open. Inside, the musty smell was stronger than before. Papers still lay scattered. The old chair in the middle of the room remained untouched, and the message on the wall, "Don't stop here at night," looked darker as if freshly written. Ramesh swallowed hard. Sir, let's go. Something is wrong. Arjun ignored him and stepped further in. He noticed something behind the desk, a trapdoor. His heart pounded. He crouched down, brushing off the dust. It had a small metal handle, rusted but still solid. Help me open this, Arjun ordered. Ramesh hesitated but obeyed. Together, they pulled. The wood groaned in protest, then suddenly snapped open. A cold gust of air hit them, and below was a dark tunnel. A tunnel beneath the petrol pump. Ramesh took a step back. Sir, what is this? Arjun's flashlight revealed old stone steps leading down. The air was damp, carrying the scent of earth and something metallic. Blood? A deep silence filled the space, as if the ground itself was holding secrets. Arjun exhaled. We're going down. Ramesh's face drained a color. Sir, no. Please. We should call for backup. But Arjun had made up his mind. The answers were down there. Taking a deep breath, he descended into the darkness. And as he did, somewhere in the distance, a whisper echoed through the tunnel. You shouldn't have come. Arjun's heart pounded as he stepped deeper into the tunnel. The cold air wrapped around him like unseen hands, and the faint whisper still echoed in his ears. Ramesh hesitated at the top of the stairs, his flashlight shaking. Sir, we need to leave. Arjun ignored him and moved forward. The tunnel walls were damp, covered in old, faded stains. The deeper they went, the stronger the smell of decay became. Then Arjun's foot hit something. He shone his flashlight downward. A shoe, old, covered in dust. Next to it, a human skull. Ramesh gasped. Oh my God! More bones were scattered across the floor. Skulls, broken ribs, fragments of clothing. An entire graveyard beneath the petrol pump. Arjun clenched his jaw. This was where they all ended up. The missing people, the travelers, the journalists, the officers who came before him. But how? Suddenly, the whisper returned. You shouldn't have come. Arjun turned sharply. The darkness ahead seemed to shift. A shadow moved, slow, unnatural. Then footsteps, not from in front of him, from behind. Ramesh turned, his flashlight trembling. Yes, sir. Someone's coming. A deep, dragging sound filled the tunnel, as if something heavy was being pulled across the ground. The air became thick, suffocating. And then they saw it. A figure emerged from the darkness. Tall, twisted, rotting. Its skin was peeling, its face disfigured, half burned, half decayed. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Vikram, the long-dead petrol pump owner. Ramesh screamed. The figure lurched forward. Arjun pulled out his gun, firing a shot. The bullet passed right through. The thing didn't stop. Arjun grabbed Ramesh's arm. Run! Now! They turned, sprinting back up the tunnel. The dragging footsteps followed, faster, closer. The trapdoor was in sight. The only way out. Arjun shoved Ramesh up first. Go, go! Ramesh scrambled out, pulling Arjun's arm. The figure lunged forward, its skeletal hand reaching, just as Arjun yanked himself out and slammed the trapdoor shut. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, bang! The trapdoor shook violently. Someone was trying to get out. Arjun and Ramesh ran, out of the office, past the abandoned petrol dispensers, toward the Jeep. As they jumped in, Arjun turned for one last look. The petrol pump stood silent, dark, empty. But just as he put the car in gear, the flickering light bulb at the office door suddenly switched off, as if someone inside had blown it out. The next morning, Arjun reported everything. The bones, the tunnel, the figure they saw. An excavation team was sent to dig under the petrol pump. What they found was worse than anyone imagined. Hundreds of skeletons, some buried for decades, some fresh. The petrol pump had been a hunting ground for years, a place where something unnatural had fed on lost travelers. But when they tried to destroy the petrol pump, the workers refused. They had heard the stories. They knew the curse. And that night, when Arjun looked at the reports again, another case file was placed on his desk. A man had gone missing the night before, at the same petrol pump. Arjun felt his blood run cold. He turned to Ramesh. I thought we closed that place. Ramesh swallowed hard. We did, sir, but... It's still there. Arjun grabbed his keys. He knew what he had to do. But as he walked toward his Jeep, his phone buzzed. A message. No sender. No number. Just 2 words. Don't come. Arjun looked around. The street was empty. But somehow, he knew he was being watched. The petrol pump still stands. Midnight comes, and the disappearances never stop. Will you stop there for fuel, or will you drive past and never look back?